Let's move to our panel and get some discussions going on some of the topics that Thomas presented on. And I'll start with Theo Pretorius. Theo is the Vice President Technology and Engineering at Sasol. He's accountable for technology and engineering at the Sasol Eco FT business, which is a new business unit that was established recently, focusing on the creation of sustainable aviation fuel, using all the technologies that Sasol has available. Theo has a long career at Sasol, and I think he's gained lots of local and global experience on topics of engineering, project development, scaling up, and the like. Welcome, Theo. So first of all, we've heard quite a bit from Thomas about hydrogen, and it seems in the public domain there's a lot about hydrogen and Sasol as well. We hear about all kinds of different projects, whether it's in Boegebaai with ArcelorMittal. It seems from a sustainable aviation fuels, you're very active. So my first question would be, seeing all this interest, where is the real focus of Sasol on the hydrogen topics, and where do you believe the best economic benefit would be? And having listened to Thomas's story, would you then agree or maybe disagree on the view that the inland opportunity might be the most difficult one?
Thank you, Jan. A couple of questions in that one question, I guess. And thank you very much for having me here. It certainly is a privilege, and I think there's a lot of momentum building up on the hydrogen, both overall in the world as well as here in South Africa. And you're right, that Sasol is focusing a lot in Southern Africa as well as globally on driving the hydrogen economy. When it comes to specifically Southern Africa, we do believe, I think, Thomas, I can agree with most of what you've said, or almost all of what you've said. From a export perspective, we believe that ammonia export is probably the most likely and earliest potential mover that's available out there in large quantities. And again, I think you talk very much to Germany, Japan, Korea also potentially. So very much aligned there with Thomas's view, and that's where Sasol is focusing. Areas like Boegebaai and so forth is specifically looking at hydrogen to ammonia and other potential derivatives. But certainly does look like ammonia for export is one of the key elements to focus on. So. Well done there, Thomas. When it comes to the internal, or let me maybe first move to the border. I think there is also opportunity, certainly from a sustainable aviation fuel perspective. There's a number of programs also in the EU being developed in order to enable that. And if one could get, the mechanisms like book and claim systems and so on, fully supportive of that remains an attractive potential option, in our opinion. And then also for the shipping and the shipping routes around our coastline. Again, when the likes of Maersk and so on, as they are developing the methanol and ammonia shipping vessels, those may certainly also be part of the opportunity. Lastly, on the hydrogen in country. Certainly that is probably the most difficult one. I think, though, that as we develop these export opportunities and the border ones, that would help us incubate the internal market as well. So certainly opportunity there, but I agree, slower than the others.
Thank you very much, Theo, and maybe we'll come back on the inland one just now. Let's move to Kaashifah. Kaashifah Beukes is the CEO of the Saldanha Bay IDZ and has been with that entity since inception. Kaashifah has almost a decade of experience in design, construction, project management of large-scale civil engineering projects. She has a BSc in civil engineering and an MBA from UCT. Welcome. So, to maybe carry on the same type of topics, Kaashifah, it seems IDZ at Saldanha Bay is also heavily involved in a number of projects or announcements. Export of hydrogen, bunker fuel, maybe even what Thomas mentioned, the green steel or green iron opportunity. So maybe a similar question to you. Where is Saldanha Bay IDZ focusing on, and where do you believe where the best economic fit is for the country?
Thanks, Jan, and hello, everyone. It is, and I know we had a previous discussion, but I think it's a difficult one for me to answer because as the special economic zone and we're meant to be a catalyst for industrialization and economic growth and the job creation that we all know that we need. Honestly, we have to meet and deal with all market interest and support all market interest. But we do see, and I do agree with, so the drivers are there, and I agree with Thomas's outline of the markets, but I do think that the export market is more complicated because there's a lot more different role players, and it's something completely new to what we're used to as a country. I mean, in the EU, where this is, and with the shipping industry, I mean, there's still a lot of discussion on the safety of seafarers when you have a vessel that's fueled on ammonia. And the costing of retrofitting these vessels or just the overall costing of these vessels and the financing of greening the ships and the standards and certification and all of that. So for me, I'm quite inspired, and I feel a lot of positive energy following on from the Sasol and the ArcelorMittal South Africa announcement, which I think is, if you really read that announcement and you understand the projects that they're doing, it's actually a fair exchange. So Sasol is investigating on producing green hydrogen in Saldanha, and we are working with them to go through the feasibility study so that investment lands in the IDZ. And then they will produce the green hydrogen and sell that to ArcelorMittal South Africa in the Saldanha plant. So you have the offtake question, and at a good scale. It's not mega, but it's 504 kilotons. In turn, ArcelorMittal from their Vaal facility will be supplying Sasol with the captured carbon. So it's an interesting commercial fair arrangement, and also it's between two industrialists who have vested IP and good balance sheets on the main market volatility, aside. But I think that is a simpler transaction. I like things to be practical, whereas the export and the bunkering, it's obvious that there's a market there, and I mean we're also advancing that, so we're not going to say no to that, and we're also pushing on those things. But I think those are more longer term.
Okay, thank you. And well, you mentioned feasibilities. You might be in an excellent position as the IDZ to see all the confidential feasibility studies that will give you a view on which ones are most economic and which ones not. But yeah, I'm not asking you to disclose that.
No. So I think the other thing I'd like to say is our role in the IDZ of attracting this investment and working with investors and industrialists is also with being a state-owned company, we have a view and access to the public sector. And so we know the policies and the strategies and plans from government and their objectives. And so we can translate what business is saying and making sure that then we work with the local authority on EIAs, the province and the national government on all of those enabling things that will actually de-risk the project and make reaching financial close easier.
Thank you. let's move to Aradhna. Aradhna Pandarum from the CSIR. She's an acting research group leader. She has a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering, focusing on renewable energy. Previously, she used to work for ESCOM, and I think she gained their invaluable experience on the topic of renewable energy. Working at the CSIR, her focus is on the just energy transition. And maybe we can have a brief chat on that topic, Aradhna. Welcome. We've heard from Thomas already about the big US billion-dollar deals that might be flowing into the country. Can you maybe give us a little bit of information on how those deals will work, and from a green hydrogen point of view, how can they assist us from a just transition point of view, and maybe soften the blow when we have to start switching off some of the coal plants?
Okay, so in terms of the first phase, which is the 8.5 billion, there has been an investment plan released and accepted by Parliament just recently. Although the plan stipulates decarbonization, modernizing the electricity grid, electric vehicles, and green hydrogen, there is very too little amount that has been set aside for green hydrogen in this 8.5 billion. So firstly, I think we're still trying to grapple with the concept of trying to decommission our coal-fired power stations. And I think one success story is that Komati, well, we started decommissioning Komati, and I think that's kudos to ESCOM on that. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to happen around, again, in terms of what you've mentioned, in terms of the strategy going forward, because I feel like looking at green hydrogen and all of these various opportunities and topics, it seems to be all over the place in my view, and we're not trying to strategize or prioritize in terms of what should we be focusing on first. And I guess that's where the feasibility studies need to come into place, and some of the research behind what we are going to be doing in terms of PTX pathways. From a just element, yeah, I think this is a little bit of a difficult one for me to speak about, especially looking at the investment plan for the 8.5 billion, although it says Just Energy Transition Partnership. I feel that the just element is missing. We still do not have full focus on what is required for that. We are speaking of these large infrastructure projects that we've never done as a country before. But we do not have the skills to do that in South Africa. And if we go just, next door to the partner program, which is REAP, and, much of the learnings would come from the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, I feel that we still haven't developed ourselves enough from that program to actually use or say that we have the skills in the country to pursue these projects. And by that virtue, I feel like we will be losing out as a country because we've not developed ourselves there. I think in terms of looking at the feasibility, I just wanted to touch on the topic because it's been mentioned. It's also something that we need to maybe consider is that Europe and other partners are willing to pay that premium that green hydrogen is coming at now. Internally in South Africa, I don't think we can afford that premium. Maybe, yes, we can look at the partnerships with Sasol and Metal, but in terms of production lines and value chains that we have already in place, the premium is still too high for South Africans to pay. But obviously the regulation aspects need to be considered. So I'll stop there for now. I can go on, but yeah.
No, thank you very much. And maybe I have a quick follow-up one. When you speak about the large infrastructure that needs to be laid out, if we look at Thomas's presentation, and if you see how hydrogen we would require and how much renewable electricity you need to make the hydrogen, is our grid correct for that? Or do we need to put all those hydrogen production facilities right next door where we want to use it?
Yeah, so I think if we actually look into the aspirations of the country, I think there has been quite a few different figures thrown around, and I think maybe the average in terms of what the Hydrogen Society roadmap kind of accumulates to is about 200 gigs of renewables, if I'm not mistaken. We have a 44 gig system at the moment. And we do have a plan in terms of transmission development because Northern Cape is kind of embargoed at the moment. You cannot add more renewables to Northern Cape grid at the moment. Eskom has put out their transmission development plan to upgrade upgrade the network. And I think they've indicated it's about 50 gigs of upgrade in 10 years. So that just gives you a perspective of timelines. If we're talking 200 gigs, where is that going to come from? Yes, there are other solutions such as battery storage and other types of storage. But in my perspective, feasibility of that, again, is not here. It's not here yet. So there's quite a few things that this whole pot needs to kind of consider. And again, that output needs to probably give us a strategy in terms of prioritization of projects. And I feel, let's start with a pilot. We've not started with a pilot. I know Sasol is planning to do that. But let's start to say that, this is how it works. This is, the technology, and even going back to the just element, if you talk to communities and engage with communities, they don't understand what it means and what it looks like. And we've had these discussions before. So at least with the pilot, you are able to show them this is what it is, and these are the opportunities that it can present to you. Now can we take you forward with our plan? Thanks.
Thank you. And looking at all those numbers, it also shows great opportunities for the future. And talking about pilots, I guess Sasol, but also DSI is actively pursuing some of those pilots. Let's move to Nicholas. Dr. Nicholas Musyoka is a research group leader at the CSIR. He holds a doctorate in chemistry from the University of the Western Cape. And he is leading at the moment several hydrogen-related topics and development topics like materials-based hydrogen storage, green methanol, hydrogen production from biogas. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Maybe one of the topics that we haven't spoken about much is what is the role of technology development in this whole new area of hydrogen? Are we set up for it in the country? And maybe do regional and international collaborations have to play a role in this space?
Thanks a lot, Jan, for that important question. For us to be able to really play a role in the hydrogen economy space as a country, research and development and innovation is a very critical thing that needs to be looked at. Firstly, it is because we are going to derive and create our own South African IP, and with the South African IP, at the end of the day, it's going to contribute towards the economy of the country. Secondly, we need to develop what we call the technology adsorptive capability. There'll be a lot of technologies that will be brought to the country through localization aspects. And for us to be able to really contribute, we need to make sure that we prepare our own people with regard to understanding the technologies that will be embedded in this particular technology so that you are receptive to that. So I'll just leave that with regard to the role and the importance of R&D. When it comes to the importance of regional and international collaboration, it's very important because the fact of the matter is that the hydrogen value chain is quite broad, and we cannot really be good in everything in the entire value chain. So there are things that we can actually identify as niche areas for the country to look at. And there are other aspects that we'll need to collaborate with the international community such that at least those things are localized in the country. And also going back to tie it with the importance of R&D and I, is that exchange of knowledge, the flow of knowledge is quite a critical thing because it will enable stimulating engagements and of course also accessing shared funding pools. For example, the Horizon funding programs, other international funding programs, and that enables us to actually couple both the R&D IP generation and of course also stimulating all these things like Thomas you talked about in terms of shared infrastructure, facilities and things like that. So I'm just going to leave it there. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. While talking about technology development, and maybe I can go back to Theo and Kaashifah, you were speaking about the inland opportunity bringing CO2 from the Bijlpark facility to Sassolburg. Do you see a role for technology development in those kind of projects? And do you see a role maybe for the CSIR that can play there from a technology development point of view?
Thanks, Jan. Yes, I think, and maybe I just want to reflect a little bit on what Kaashifah also said in terms of the Sasol and ArcelorMittal arrangement. Certainly, I think you know what's important in this whole environment is the collaboration, the partnering between industry players, government, and academia, technology development as well. And Aradhna said it's important. You know, why don't we start with pilots? And I think that's exactly the thing. We quite often, as Sasol as industry, as one of the industry leaders, would quite often say, you know, we're just going to do this. We know this. We're just going to go ahead doing this, without really realizing how much of a lack of understanding there might be in you know general about the feasibility of these technologies, the capability and the robustness thereof, and therefore these pilots are really necessary to build the confidence in you know in the industry on these new technologies that we want to deploy. And yeah, and I think specifically, you know, the type of work that the CSIR can help with is there's a lot of fundamental research and development that's also you know important. But I think in many of these areas, and because it's not, we can't always build these things in the most you know ideal locations, and the fact that the renewable energy is so fluctuating, and you need to deal with the capacity factors and those kind of things. There's lots of that understanding of the dynamics and how to actually build these facilities to be optimally making use of all of those intricate balances between the capacity factors, the dynamics of the renewable energy, and then the dynamics of these processes. So I think a lot of that type of simulation work, help understanding that, and then working that into these pilots, into these demonstration facilities could be very useful in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Theo. Kaashifah, I don't know whether you want to add to that or whether I can ask you something else, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I think you can answer something else. I agree. I think we need pilots. There's so much interest, but it's kind of like who's going to be the first one, you know? And I think that there's a lot more. It's kind of a weird space. There's a lot more clarity on who the stakeholders are that can actually be in decision-making positions to actually say, we're going to do it. So, like the IDC, for example, because I mean, a pilot needs funding. It's funding at risk, you know. So you need somebody with IP, a customer, and a place to do the business, launch the thing, and then you need money to be burnt, electrolyzed, and so that it's becoming clearer to us certainly of who those people are, because the conversations are maturing over the last 2 years. I would say.
Thanks. Maybe a last quick one for you. You spoke earlier about the difficulty exporting and all the regulations and the safety aspect from an ammonia point of view. Do you think methanol is a better one than ammonia? Because you might have less of those issues.
Look, I'm not gonna. I think there's. I will leave it to the. As you said, I'm a civil engineer, so if the ship can be built and everybody and there is clear regulations from the IMO but to add to that, at the IMO conference in Durban a few weeks ago that Thomas and I attended. There was a presentation by someone from the IMO who was saying they are actually re-looking at those targets because they know that 2050, 50% is not. But also what they're doing is they're putting guidelines together for different countries to actually then how do you decarbonize shipping? Because they have done some pilots and they've realized from the feedback from these countries in the maritime industry that you can't just go in. So that I think is going to help sort out that question.
Thank you very much. We're about to wrap up. Cosmas, maybe I can ask you the last question. You spoke already about the Hydrogen Society roadmap that it was developed and announced. Maybe you can give us 1 minute on where do we stand on starting to execute on that roadmap already. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. I think we are in the process of implementing the action plan as articulated in the document. But more importantly, there are about 4 catalytic projects that we identified. One of them is the Platinum Valley project, which looks at the corridor from Limpopo down to Durban, and looking at the heavy-duty trucks traveling on that corridor and carrying goods, and how we can decarbonize those trucks. But also, in addition to that, looking at what else can be developed on either side of the corridor in terms of the hydrogen production hubs, as well as hydrogen end-use gases. So places like Sasol and other areas where we have got ESCOM power stations that will be repurposed, for instance. Crude Flay is an example because of its location very close to the N3. So those are the kind of projects that we are looking at. There is also the Bukubai project, which is being led by Sasol and the Presidency and the Northern Cape Development Agency. And one of them, which is a passion of mine, is the Core CO2 project. And I think it goes back to what we were addressing earlier around the just transition. What is just transition? And for me, the Core CO2 addresses some of those, because if we look at capturing the flue gases coming out of coal-fired boilers, which are mostly your CO2, SOx, and NOx, combining them with green hydrogen to make your fertilizer salts, sulfuric acid, all those are commodities that could either be exported as well as go into the hydrogen production value chain through electrolysis, for instance. So for me, I think we envisage a situation where there is an existing economy in Mpumalanga, where we have most of our coal-fired power stations. There is an emerging economy in the Northern Cape on the basis of the renewable energy products. And I think for me, that's where the just transition has to express itself, because it's about preserving jobs within the core sector, but at the same time introducing new economic value chains that will then preserve the economies of those kind of regions.
Thank you very much, Cosmas, for those last words. And let's thank our panel, because this is the end of discussion. And I hope that the members of the panel will be outside the room in the foyer if we have any detailed questions, please interact with them afterwards. Thank you very much.